Hello and welcome to another lesson in the Cambridge iGCSE interactive video course. This is module 1.5 or lesson 6 of the course, and in this lesson we'll be looking at recognizing fact, opinion and bias. Words you've possibly come across before and you have a good understanding of. We're going to be taking a look at how facts, opinion and biases can be evident in different pieces of writing and how to kind of detect them and distinguish between them. So let's take a look without any further ado at the learning objectives for today. We're going to identify factual information. We're going to be focusing on how to identify factual information and opinion, and very importantly, how to differentiate between them. So how do we know what's fact and what's opinion? And as we'll see, it's not always as clear-cut as it may seem. We're going to think about how we recognize possible bias and also have a look at how biases might be evident in different forms. We're also going to think about how, and this is a very effective persuasive technique, opinions can often be presented as fact. And if you're not careful, you may be fooled into thinking an opinion is actually a fact. So we're going to have a look at a piece to examine that a little bit and get to grips with that. And then we're going to have a think about how different types of evidence are used in writing to try and convince the reader, often in persuasive arguments, persuasive pieces, to strengthen the argument and make it more convincing. So evidence from research studies, for example, scientific reports, facts, statistics, and also, on a more personal note, anecdotes drawn from the writer or the speaker's personal lives and their interactions with others or their experiences can also be used to connect with the audience and provide a kind of means of supporting what they're saying. See, this happened to me, and it shows that it could happen. It's kind of a source of evidence there to support what the writer's saying or the speaker is saying. We're going to then, in the second part of the lesson, we're going to look at analysis and evaluation. What does that mean? What does it involve? How do we actually go about analysing and evaluating, which essentially means weighing up and considering various arguments? And that can be challenging. It can be quite a tricky thing. But as I say so often, practicing your evaluation skills, read newspaper and magazine articles and think about what the points are that the writer's making, and ask yourself and discuss with your family members maybe, what are the merits of this argument? What are the disadvantages or advantages? What are the strengths and weaknesses? Can you pull apart an argument and find its weak points in order to highlight how it might be a flawed argument? So that's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at in the second half of the lesson. So we're going to start with thinking about how non-fiction writing often makes use of facts and expresses opinions. Non-fiction, you'll recall, is factual texts. So not fiction is anything that's made up, basically, and non-fiction is the opposite. So non-fiction often uses, so think about encyclopedias or books about flight or the solar system or volcanoes or whatever it is. You'll find often in books of that kind lots and lots of facts. But what do we mean by a fact? What is a fact? Actually thinking about it, what does a fact mean? What is a fact? What a fact, and significantly it differs from an opinion. Okay, so facts are statements that we know to be true, or theoretically, in theory, we could prove them to be true. So we can say that the Earth is round. Okay, that's a fact. And we could prove that fact if we were to go out into space on a spaceship. We could look back at the Earth and we'd see with our own eyes, the evidence of our own eyes, that yes, indeed, the Earth is round. not flat. So therefore it's a statement of fact. The fact that we're not actually going to go into space and prove it is irrelevant. In theory we could, right? So that's the point. So it's something that we know is definitely true and correct and accurate. Okay, opinions on the other hand are a person's personal viewpoint, a person's particular point of view, and an opinion reflects that. So if you write about, I don't know, what flavor ice cream you like, and we'll be looking at that in a moment as subject of debate, it's not something that's a statement of fact necessarily, not necessarily at all. It's obviously somebody's personal preferences what flavor ice cream they like, and it's not something that's right or correct to say that one flavor is definitely the best. Okay, so we'll see that in a moment. And crucially, and this is something to take on board, and it's helpful when thinking about how to separate out facts from opinions. Ask yourself, is this sentence something that everybody could agree with, or if it's even possible that someone might disagree with it, it is an opinion rather than a fact. So let's take a look at some sentences to decide which are facts and which are opinions now, just to kind of practice what we've just looked at. So wisdom comes with age. Many of you may agree with that, perhaps your parents may agree with that, but is it actually a statement of fact? What do you think? I hope you're saying no, because it's possible that an old person could be more foolish and less wise than somebody who's young. Sometimes we say that a young person has a wise head on their shoulders. It's possible, isn't it, in theory at least, that somebody who's young might be wiser than somebody who's old. So not necessarily the case that wisdom comes with age, although many people may think that to be true or believe that to be true. It's just an opinion, isn't it? Traveling to far-flung countries is an educational and exciting experience. Right. Opinion or fact? It is an opinion again, right? So traveling to other countries, I'm sure a lot of you, including myself, would agree that traveling to other countries is an educational and exciting experience, but maybe not everyone feels like that. And that's okay, because each to their own. But the point is, the significant point here is that it is not a fact. Equally, you might question that by saying maybe you don't need to travel to far-flung countries to experience what it's like and learn about other countries and other cultures and so on. The other aspect to consider is it necessarily exciting? Maybe some people find it a bit nerve-wracking or unpleasant or uncomfortable because they like their home comforts and they like to be in their own home and in their own bed and so on. So maybe it's not educational and exciting for everyone. Maybe some people might argue that a trip to their local museum might be just as educational or even more educational. Some of the museums, the world-class museums in London, may offer many educational experiences, which would mean we don't necessarily have to travel abroad to learn about other cultures and so on. So lots to consider there. Our planet revolves around the sun, and one complete orbit takes 365 days. Now, is that a fact or an opinion? I think we can all agree that that is a fact, because we could actually measure that, couldn't we? We could count the number of days that the Earth takes to orbit the sun, and we could also prove using telescopes and scientific equipment and from monitoring it from space that this is indeed a fact. Okay, so we could prove it to be true and correct, even if in reality most of us are never likely to actually do that. We know we could. Right, that's the point. Water is essential for life, and we can only survive without it for a maximum of approximately 3 days. And that's an interesting fact there. Maybe you knew that. Perhaps not, but you've learned something new today. So that is definitely a fact, isn't it? So this is something that, it's obvious that water is essential for life. Without it, we can't survive for very long. So definitely, and we could prove this medically, we could prove this using a biological technique. So that is definitely a fact. We could prove it. Vanilla ice cream is undoubtedly the best flavor. What do you think? Is it your favorite? Or maybe you like mint choc chip? That's my favorite. That's my vote. So vanilla ice cream is undoubtedly the best flavor. It's definitely an opinion, isn't it? I know there'd be strong disagreement in my house about that. So definitely not a fact. So with these examples, it's quite straightforward, I think, to figure out which of them are facts and which are opinions, but it's not always that clear cut. And often writers deliberately suggest or they express an opinion as though it's a fact in order to try and convince us of their point of view. So we'll be looking at that in a moment in a bit more detail, but just some exam advice here. When responding to directed writing tasks, which is the big one of the big tasks on paper 2, which we'll be looking at further on in the course, you're going to be presented with a text that you'll base your writing on, or 2 texts, and you will need to be able to show that you can pick out facts and opinions, because you may be asking, why do I need to know this? Well, it's a useful and valuable skill in everyday life, I would argue, but for in terms of the exam, you need to be able to show that you can separate out facts from opinions, and you know the difference between them, and crucially that you can use them in your own arguments or build a case. And also the other aspect to consider is that you can kind of recognize which is opinion, which is fact. We're going to have a go with that in a moment with an article. And just to introduce a key term here. So one of the things that at the beginning I said we're going to be looking at is bias. Now, just to make sure that you understand what bias is, I've got a definition here for you. So it's an inclination for or against someone or something. So you favor something, particular argument, or might be biased towards someone, and it's often unfair. So you might actually not want to consider alternative views. So having a strong leaning towards one side of a debate, for example, like say you are on the side of the debate arguing that travel is something that everybody should experience, that would be, if you were definitely of that opinion and everything that you said in your piece or your speech or whatever it is suggested that, and you dismissed any alternative arguments, that would indicate bias. Okay, so you're not looking at it in a kind of neutral way. It's one-sided. So that's really what we mean by being biased. And you might downplay, or you might neglect to mention certain arguments that kind of contradict your viewpoint. For example, travel is very expensive, isn't it? So you might downplay that and not highlight that issue or that negative aspect of travel. And you also might sort of soften the negative aspects of which go against your argument. So hopefully that will become clear, and we'll look at a piece in a bit more detail in a moment. So if that's not clear already, hopefully it is. So it means that you would deliberately try not to mention anything that might go against your particular point of view. Either you might ignore it altogether, or if you do acknowledge it and recognize it, you might kind of lessen the impact of it so it doesn't sound as bad as it might be, or as bad as others think it is. So you'd kind of, downplay the effects of that. So now we're going to have a look a little bit at, we've talked about facts and we talked about opinions. We've talked about opinions and what they are. And as I said, you need to be able to distinguish between objective and subjective viewpoint. So what do we mean by that?